Hello? Hey, all your chitter chatter, we're streaming. So we're online right now. And people are watching at home, listening to you guys have fun. So knock it off, you know. Pastor Donn Dobberstein, I got to meet back when he was a young pastor in Topeka, Kansas, and I was a wandering college student figuring out life and wound up living in a pastor's basement in Manhattan, Kansas for 6 months, knocking on doors trying to start a church. So we were starting a church in Manhattan, and we drive the hour to Topeka every Sunday for church, and got to know Pastor Dobberstein then. And he has served our synod, so he has served us as director of WELS Discipleship for about the last 5 years, yes. He said. Yeah. When they moved to the area, they joined Trinity Waukesha, and every Sunday he'd drive by St. John's McGuanago and say, I ain't going there. Yeah. But now they do go here. Don and his wife Beth, they have 4 kids. 5? 4?
4.
4 kids.
4. And
some grandkids.
1 wife.
1 wife, 4 kids and a grandkid or 2?
And a grandkid, yep.
That's fantastic. So he's going to talk to us about holy habits for a new year. He's going to talk for about 52 minutes, and then if you're lucky, he'll tell you about the putting contest they have at Synod Office Building on Fridays. And Jason Oakland, Pastor Jason Oakland is here, and he'll be our speaker on the first Wednesday in February about Job and the problem of suffering. So, Pastor Dobberstein, well, let's give him a St. John's welcome.
See, for 5 years until I actually joined here at St. John's, I'd be getting texts, usually about once every 3 months, a little dig from like Pastor Borland saying, how are you still enjoying that drive going by? So just these little digs, and that went on incessantly. But when my family, I mean, the reason why, to defend myself from Pastor Borland, I went to Trinity Waukesha is I had a son who was in 8th grade when we moved here. And so it was just like, it was like as the crow flies, drop the son off, go to work, pick him up, come home. So that was the only reason for it. And after that, there would be times when it's like, oh, that's 35 minutes to go to Trinity Waukesha. How about, well, we'll just go to St. John's, it's so much closer. And my kids commented of how much this felt like Port Orange, Florida, where they grew up for 18 years, and the congregation there, which the congregation there was about 250 people. So for them to feel like, oh, it feels like we're back at Port Orange, for them to feel like they were at home in a church of over 1,000 people, I was really fascinated by that, and I think this speaks kudos to the building God has blessed you with, to the pastors, and to you. The hospitality that you have. Holy habits for a new year. I couldn't call it New Year's resolutions. I thought that's almost too gimmicky. But did you make one? Do you know what the top 3 New Year's resolutions are? Usually, take a guess. Weight, I heard, health, and money. Now attach like a verb to each of them. One is better, healthy habits, lose weight, and save money. Those are the top 3. Studies have shown that less than half of Americans now make New Year's resolutions. And of the 46% that do, the less than 10% at the end of the year say they were successful in carrying out their New Year's resolutions. Why? Why do you think that is? Well, they did a little bit of a study of that too. Number 1, unrealistic goals. So you can dream big, but it may be unrealistic. Number 2, they had the goal, but they had no structure, they had no strategy, they had no system in order to take it out. And the number 3 reason why people failed at carrying out their New Year's resolutions, they forgot them. 25% of the people said Oh yeah, that's right. What was it? And so they couldn't remember them. So when you look at that, then you have to say to yourself, what exactly is it that is needed in order to carry out a New Year's resolution? And so as we take a look at that, I think this is kind of where we're going for today. If we're going to have a New Year's resolution, it usually means you have to stop something in order to start something. So whether it's a good or a bad habit, whether we're talking a holy or unholy habit, usually that has to happen. But that is going to be huge, and that can be daunting if, for the reasons that were cited, you either forget what the goal is, you have no system in order to get there, or the goal that you're setting is unrealistic. And so I believe there's a direct connection with that to those two words. And I tried this. If you open up any dictionary, which I did, and I had 3 of them on my shelves, I opened up every single one, and you will find less than a page apart those two words, discipline and a disciple. So I think if we can focus on those 2 D words, it will have an impact upon resolutions. And now we just have to say, what's the connect between discipline and disciple to the kind of habits that we say that we want? And I want you to assume with me that if we're going to be doing that, empowering discipline and discipleship, it has to be the Word of God. The proximity that discipline and discipleship have to God's Word and sacrament, it's the fuel. It's the battery pack. If discipline and disciple have no cables attached to God's Word and sacrament, then it doesn't matter what kind of habits you set up for a New Year's resolution. It ain't going to happen. And so we're using New Year's resolutions, but empowering it with God's Word. And so just if I was going to say discipleship, just what exactly is the basics for how do we understand it? I would say a discipleship is simply someone who responds to Christ's invitation when he first gave it, he's to come follow me. But to explain that, I think it's one thing to believe and follow Jesus, but then to follow through on what? To confess it is one thing, to follow through in activity, to take what you believe and to put it into action. That's what we're talking with following Jesus as his discipleship. And it kind of ties into taking the word disciple and putting the word ship at the end of it. The reason for doing that, the first is found in Scripture, disciple. Discipleship, that term is never found in Scripture, but I would say discipleship is the ongoing experience of being a disciple versus having been made a disciple. Which you think about it, if you're thinking like Lutherans do, can you see the exit ramps that oftentimes happen to Lutheran discipleship? Where do you think they may be? Like, okay, you're baptized. Is that the end? I have been made a disciple. I'm part of the family of God. So baptism, that entry point, but if that's all the further it gets. Well, but then we get to 8th grade, now maybe we're confirming children. And can you see the next off-ramp when it comes to discipleship? Oh, I have been confirmed, and then discipleship kind of ends. Or we're finding out that one of the greatest off-ramps in the current generation, Generation Z, is high school graduation. After high school graduation, and then they head out, they've been at home, they have their home church, but then they head out into the big bad world, and all of a sudden, mom's not there. Dad's not there to tell them to go to church. And all of a sudden, you can see kids, Generation Z, now they have to take responsibility for their own discipleship. And it's a little messy transition that is happening at that stage. And so we need to talk both of them, what it means to be a disciple, but then it's never finished. It's always an ongoing process that will continue for the rest of their life. In the 5 years that I've been looking at discipleship, I think I've been able to figure out that the top 2 main attributes of discipleship come down to these 2. The first one is that is highly relational. You cannot talk discipleship or being a disciple without talking people. That's all it is. Discipleship isn't a program. It's simply about people influencing other people. The other aspect is simply it's going to take a high level of commitment. And I think this is the one that's plaguing churches all across America ever since COVID has hit. For many churches, church attendance, worship attendance on Sunday has not gone back up to the level as pre-COVID. Why? Because people's commitment levels have leveled off or they've decreased. Discipleship, those two attributes, it is highly relational and high level of commitment. Those two attributes, they do affect holy habits. They do affect New Year's resolutions. So if I was going to get back to the very roots of what is needed for discipleship, if you find it already in the Old Testament. And in that first, talmid and lemut are two Hebrew words. The first one is in Ezra, in the book of First Chronicles. I'll sum it up like this. David wants to get things set for a musical ministry in the new temple. The temple is going to get built, but it hasn't been yet. King Dave is making plans for it. And in First Chronicles chapter 25, he is identifying about 288 musicians and instrumentalists to be part of this music ministry. And then in that verse, it talks about how these 288, some of them are young, some of them are old, some of them are teachers, and some of them are students. And that's where the first word ever that's used for a disciple is used in Holy Scripture. It's talking about the relationship between a teacher and a student. The ones that I like for a lemut, which is another word for being a disciple, Isaiah was told by God, I want you to go to Israel and I want you to give them this bad news. Then Isaiah says, bind up the testimony and seal up the law among my disciples, which means Isaiah the prophet had disciples of his own. And so he's taking this message of God, and as it's secured to him, he is also securing it for his followers. The last one I think is fascinating, from Jeremiah chapter 13. Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard its spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to doing evil. That means just as a person can become accustomed to doing good, so a person can become accustomed to doing evil. So you're going to be, what I learned from that is everybody is a disciple. Everybody follows something, someone. Who's it going to be? And in Psalm 1, that's where the psalmist talks about, blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the ways of the wicked. Why? Because he's like a tree planted by springs of water. See, there's a difference between who are you going to follow? So that's discipleship in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, there's the word for a disciple that occurs 230 times, and most of them have everything to do with Jesus' 12 disciples. Put together all of the Gospels, and you can imagine the many times that Jesus said this to his disciples, or his disciple Peter said this. 28 times you find that word in the book of Acts. And now it's referring to the group of believers, the early Christians, the ones who were following Christ, the ones who were part of the way. So that word disciple is synonymous with the early Christian church that is being gathered. Only 3 times, though, does it appear in a verb form in the New Testament, and only once, 2 of them are participle forms, but only once does it take an imperative form, the highest kind of I want you to do this. I'm giving you this command, and the command is in Matthew chapter 28. Go make disciples of all nations. So now what does that mean, though? To make disciples, or to be a learner or a follower. I think when we talk disciple or discipleship, when I came into the position, I was absolutely overwhelmed. It's taken me the better part of 5 years to learn more and more about what exactly do those terms mean. They're just so vague. They're so all-encompassing of everything that we do in the life of a Christian. It's how do you quantify what it means to be a disciple of Jesus today in our kind of a setting? And it took me back into the New Testament just to hear what does Jesus say about it. He does have some things to say. In Luke chapter 9, that's where Jesus says, if anyone wants to come after me, what must he do? He must, deny himself, and then take up a cross, and then follow me, right? So the mark of a disciple is someone who is denying himself and he's carrying a cross. No cross, no disciple, no Christian. So to me, this is, I wonder if discipleship today is, we want to be able to have New Year's resolutions that we can carry out, but we don't have to work for it. So we want to be a disciple of Jesus, but I don't think that just coming to church on Sunday morning encompasses and carries out completely everything that Jesus had in mind, especially when he says, you're going to know if you're following me. What? If that means you're putting me first, not you, and you're suffering pain in your life, and it's because of me. You're carrying a cross just as I did, so you will also. So I wonder, would that be sobering, if becoming a new member here at St. John's, and wasn't it just a couple Sundays ago, you just had all those new members up there? I would have loved to have heard them say, will you joyfully as a St. John's member, will you suffer pain? If so, answer, I will. How many would joyfully say that but that's it. That Jesus is saying this is a key mark of being of discipleship. And I wonder if this is the one that we've lost sight of. No one's talking about this. Suffering pain. Nobody wants to do that. Second one, Matthew chapter 10. This is a time when Jesus is talking about the relationship of a student to a teacher, a master to a servant. And it's in order for a student to rise to the level of a teacher, he must be trained. So there's a training. There's the Apostle Paul said, Timothy, be an imitator of me. Model what I do. And so that aspect of you're not out there on your own. You are being influenced by someone who's just ahead of you. That's why discipleship cannot be done alone. It must always be done in conjunction with someone like Christ, whom we follow. John 8:31, Jesus says, if you hold to my what? My teachings, then you are my disciple. So the mark of discipleship has to be doctrine, but it's doctrine not as a rigid body of beliefs that we say, here I stand. And the purpose of the church is to defend gospel. That's why we exist. It is, but when Jesus was saying this, if you hold to my teachings, the doctrine was never meant to be rigid and just confessed. Doctrine was meant to be lived. And that's the whole reason why Christ gave us all of his teachings, so that we live by his teachings. And so that becomes part of not just our faith life, but our sanctified life as well. John 13, this is the night before he died. He's in the upper room, and Jesus says, this is how love one another as I have loved you. This is how they will know that you are my disciple if you love one another. And that is a huge, keep in mind these marks of discipleship, because after we're going to be starting talking about people and how these marks have been carried out all the way through history. And in Matthew chapter 28, there Jesus is saying, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And he said, now go make disciples. I always like to think that discipleship as part of the Great Commission. Great Commission oftentimes is thought of, that's evangelism, right? That's for outreach. I don't think so. Jesus put the word discipleship, making disciples, he put that in as a priority of the Great Commission. This is not just outreach and evangelism. This is outreach, evangelism, and discipleship squished together like an Oreo cookie. Evangelism is the cream in the middle, and on either side of it are the brown cookies, and those cookies are discipleship. Being a disciple, growing as a disciple, is what motivates one to make disciples. And then once you become a disciple, then the discipleship continues afterwards. So there you have it. It's the motivation and the continuity of evangelism. You are disciple makers before people come through the front door. And then once they're welcomed through the door into church, the life of discipleship continues. So I think it's important that we understand it's not just about getting people through the doors, but once they're here. I always tell Pastor Eric Recker, he's the director of evangelism. I said, your job is so easy. I was like, all you have to focus on is getting people up to the front door of churches. I said, then you walk away. I was like, then I got them for the rest of their lives, because that's the life of discipleship, and that is a huge challenge. It is for my life. How much more for those who are coming into the faith, each one of them. Okay, so I don't know if we have to discuss it, but for the sake of time, but if that's true, if those are the marks of discipleship that help us in carrying out holy habits, New Year's resolutions, then my question for you is, can you begin to see the connect between those marks and this coming year? What those holy habits and being able to carry them out. And then maybe a personal gut check is simply then what are the marks that may be missing in your life habits? Which one is it? Is it the thought of pain, that it just kind of overwhelms you to think that, but when other things don't draw us closer to Christ, it is absolutely amazing that our discipleship can be growing at 10 miles an hour as we're going through life. And then all of a sudden, something absolutely hurtful and painful happens in our life, and all of a sudden, we're going 55 miles an hour, growing closer to Christ. That's what pain actually does. So to be able to embrace pain in life as a disciple of Christ, because it grows a closer relationship with him. If we're going to take a look at discipleship in the past, I guess one of the questions I've always asked myself is, then what were the habits of disciples? When Jesus said, go make disciples of all nations, what did he have in mind at that time? What exactly was going on in his world that how would they understand being a disciple or discipleship? And I think the best example I can have is Gamaliel, one of the most well-known Pharisees of Jesus' time. Gamaliel is estimated to have had 1,000 followers, disciples that followed him. In other words, I mean, if you have 1,000 followers, where are you going to put them all? I mean, think about this. Try to fit 1,000 people in this church tonight. Here was Gamaliel up in front. And if you were going to declare yourself and attend the school of Gamaliel, they had different levels of discipleship, of being a disciple. And you can see them there. The beginner stage of being a disciple for Gamaliel was you simply shut up. You were not allowed to speak. All you were allowed to do was to look and to listen. And whatever Gamaliel did and said, you committed it to memory and you followed. You learned his habits. How did he fold his hands in prayer? What were his mannerisms during worship? What exactly was it that he was saying? That's all you did for that first stage. For the second stage, that meant now you could talk. You could ask him questions. That was now allowed. You could begin to think for yourself. The third stage, being a disciple associate, that meant your proximity to Gamaliel was when he came up for prayers, you were right behind him. And so at this stage, it's like, remember in high school, if you ever had gatherings, I just remember freshmen sit in the back, right? Why? Well, you're a freshman, right? And so the prime seats got to be more for the upperclassmen. So that same thing is happening here. When you got to the final stage, which was disciple of the wise, that's when you were considered to be on equal with Gamaliel. That means now you knew everything that he had been able to teach. You were on that same par. But get this. At that stage, when you become a disciple of the wise, then you had to go. Then you had to leave. You weren't part of that school anymore. Now you had to go, rent your own space, put your own sign on the front, saying, I'm going to open up a school. And I'm going to attract disciples that will be following me. You see what? So make disciples. Jesus, you can see Jesus was saying there's the reproduction, but it wasn't programmatic reproduction. It was influence. The influence of one person upon another person. And I think that's one of the principles of discipleship. If we're going to be talking about holy habits, and we're talking about proximity to Christ, and that the attributes of discipleship is highly relational and high level of commitment. What helps is like what we're doing tonight. You're not alone. We are together in on this. Discipleship is best done whenever, it can't be done alone. It's in proximity to Christ. The further distance a person is from Christ, then you're going to see the effects of it upon their habits, upon their discipleship. The closer the walk is behind Christ, or the more you're snugged up next to other people in being discipled through life, that's what was meant, and that's what was put on display at Jesus' time. And not just with the Pharisees, but John chapter 1:35, we're told that John the Baptist, he had disciples. And even in the book of Acts, we're told John the Baptist still had disciples that were out there. The Essenes, they left the corruption of the Jewish society, and they separated themselves and said, we're going to have our own community. And it became very much ascetic. That's the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's why they were found out in those caves. It was always interesting through history, whenever discipleship got bad in the church, there always was like a group or someone that hit the reset button and said, one reaction had another reaction to it. So whenever there was corruption, there were those who said, nope, now we're going to separate from it. We're going to have a restoration. Zealots, remember even Jesus had a zealot. The historian Josephus talks about the zealots who also gained for themselves disciples. They were looking for this Jewish Messiah that they could follow. So discipleship in all different forms for all different causes, but it all began with someone leading the way and those who were following. Then after the time of the apostles, then there came discipleship with the early bishops. And here were some: Clement, Ignatius, Polycarp. All of them focused on some element of discipleship. Either there was like a discipline, or there was a focus on fasting, a focus upon prayer. Polycarp, he said the highest form of being a follower of Jesus is martyrdom. And he was the one. These were all followers of John, of the Apostle John. And Polycarp was the one that ultimately he did experience during like one of the persecutions after Nero. He met martyrdom by burning. We're all Catholic. It's finally Christianity becomes legal in the year 325. And after the year 325, you got all of this loose-knit group of bishops of different churches, and then over the course of, I would say, the next 400 years, there developed from the bishops, a couple of bishops who rose to the top, right? Rome, Constantinople. And from this, now all the churches that are springing up, and they're being united, and now they're being overseen by the system of bishops, but also of popes. In that course of 400 years and about 130 popes, then I don't know how to say, during that time period, we're all Catholic means this is the universal Christian church. But now it became more like crime syndicates. Pope Julian II, he's one of my favorites during this time period. Pope Julian II, he's the one, no, it wasn't during that time period, because he's the one that commissioned Michelangelo. Before Michelangelo did the Sistine Chapel, Pope Julian said, I want you to sculpt my tomb for when I die. And but then somehow he got sidetracked, and then we have the Sistine Chapel. How about that? But then during that time, Pope Julian said, I think I'm going to go to war. And he got himself a marching band, and he got himself a bunch of servants and about 3,000 horses and soldiers, and he went off to war. Didn't fight a single battle. But when he came back, he declared himself a victor, and he was a conqueror. You see what was happening? A pope, what was supposed to be the leader of the Christian church, was he got away from the following of Christ, and because of that, it gave rise to a new kind of discipleship. So remember, I told you that there always was like a pushback whenever discipleship started being on the wane or corrupted. So what happened? Two guys I'll outline for you. The one on the right, if you can see him, he was a Saint Anthony. They call him Father of the Desert. He was so disgusted by the Christian church at that time. This is in the 300s. He was so disgusted by it. He said that the church is all about activities when the church ought to be about spiritual transformation. He says, I don't see that happening in the church. Therefore, he said, I'm out of here. And he focused on the kind of an ascetic life. So he went into the desert, and that's where he lived. This is the guy who, when he was in the desert, and he said, I'm going to fight the devil out there just as Jesus did. He never washed his feet again, and he wore a vest that he never washed again. So that was his ascetic kind of a life. I'm going to get away from the corruptness so that I can focus on spiritual warfare, my personal discipleship. The thing about it is when he went out there and people started hearing about him, hundreds of people then ended up going out to be his followers. Ever see the movie Forrest Gump? Remember when he starts running across America? And then all of a sudden, that's exactly what happened with these guys. All of a sudden, they start being heard, they become famous, and then people are following them. And so there actually was a monastery, and that was in the desert, and there's the founder of it right there. On the left side, that is Saint Simeon Stylites. What's interesting about him, he became a monk at age 18, and he was such an avid, passionate person who lived what he called the ascetic life. In other words, it was disciplined, rigorous. He stayed away from the enjoyments of the world because his one focus was, how do I live best for Christ and only for him? It's kind of like a young Martin Luther who would be in his jail cell and whipping himself and saying his prayers over and over. This guy lived such an ascetic life that actually the leader of his monastery came to him and said, either you got to moderate yourself, buddy, and if you can't, we got to ask you to leave. And he left. And where he went to was he built himself a little pillar that was 6 to 8 feet in height, and he made himself like a little platform on top. And I've never been able to say how big was that platform. I don't know. But I'm thinking, put together, I don't know, maybe how about from this pew here, and then over to about right here. You know, when I take a look, there were so many pictures of him on top of a pillar. And the reason, when you look at that pillar, you notice how tall it is? Like, it seems to be over the top of the Gothic church in the background. It's because as he spent more and more years on top of that pillar, on that platform, it got raised over and over. So it went from 6 to 8 feet, and years later it went up to 50 feet, and at the end of his life it was up to 80 feet. 80 feet this guy was up in the air. And he did that for 36 years. 36 years. That was for him, that was personally, for him, that was the ascetic life. And people were attracted to that. His own mom, supposedly, his own mom died at the foot of the pillar. And he looked down and he saw the coffin, but he never came down, never said anything. But she was okay with that. Can you imagine? So why did these guys do these things? It was a reaction to corrupted discipleship. And then there's one problem with this. This is discipleship that you have to do outdoors. Extreme weather. This isn't going to last, right? And so that's why they just simply moved it indoors. And so discipleship at its highest form, to say we're going to push back on the corruption or the lack of transformation, and they worked, and this is where it happened. Now, the monastic life is the rigorous life. There are laws, there are practices that are put into place, but they're all different. All of these men started different monasteries for different purposes. One was focused more upon being able to carry out discipleship in ordinary kind of life. Another of the monasteries focused more upon prayer. Another one focused upon leadership qualities. The Jesuits, they focused on missionaries. Augustinians, which Luther was a part of, they focused on the academics. And so the rise for all these different areas of discipleship, and then along comes Martin Luther, and what does he do? He's focusing on discipleship too, but he focused especially upon the catechism. And the purpose of the catechism, he said, he wanted people who were going to be taught by God, to get them back into the scriptures. It's interesting, he said, this catechism is not for the rustici, which are for the simple, the town, the peasant folk. He said it's for the pagani, which are for the pagans. Luther's concern was that people would go through life and not believing. And so that was his greatest concern. And so the small catechism, yes, it was for the education of children, but it was for the common people. The large catechism, that was for pastors and for heads of household to train them up. But then so that's Luther, but then after Luther comes Thomas Cranmer, and his influence on discipleship had to do with the first, I don't know, maybe the first devotional book? The Book of Commons, I think it was. The Book of Commons was like, if you read Meditations, it was the first Meditations. And yet it was the first system that gave people a way for prayers and for scripture readings. And so here you see, remember we talked about habits, resolutions, that needs a system for it to be carrying out. Thomas Cranmer gave them. And then this guy put up there, because I love his nose. Spener is, he's what they call the father of the pietist movement. He saw, after the wars that had ravaged Europe and Germany, this was the guy that said, I'm tired of cold, dead orthodoxy, people just going through the motions. He wanted people to embrace the realness of Christ, his teachings, and living it out in his life. And so he wanted to bring people together. Then after Spener, I got two of them. That's the nose I wanted you to see. Yep, that's it. And then after that was John Wesley. Ever heard of him? His connection with discipleship is he's considered the father of the Methodist Church. And Methodist is for methods. And so his focus was, what are the methods that are going to be able to keep people close to God in life? the fallacy, the challenge, the problem with discipleship and all of discipleship in the past is when you focus on methods and how it's carried out, legalism becomes a huge problem. And that's counter to the gospel. I even found something. What about the Lutheran Church? Here was the synod president just over 100 years ago. World War I had ravaged Europe. And after it was done, this synod president, Pieper, he wrote a paper at a synod convention entitled the Reconstruction of the Church, because Europe was being reconstructed at that time as well. Pieper is the one who said, we also need to have a reconstruction within the Wisconsin Synod. And I think he said this: reconstruction begins at home. I thought that was so interesting, because we could talk about what we do as a church. He said, it can't start in church, it's got to start in people's homes. He said this: it is unmistakable that the spiritual life among us is in the process of diminishing. We have now had the gospel in its truth and purity in great abundance and power for so long a time, and have accustomed ourselves to this blessing so thoroughly that we no longer regard it as something extraordinary. Does that sound familiar? It's like everything every time that there is a decline spiritual, there's a pushback. So everything that he's lamenting is exactly what we see today, happening today. He went on and he talked about, I go into people's homes and I see no Bible out. He goes, the only one who seems to care about it is Grandma, because she's the one that I see the Bible and the hymnal next to her chair. He goes, but no one's teaching the Lord's Prayer anymore. The families don't even know how to do the table prayer anymore. That was Pieper lamenting it. And then he ripped pastors. He said, the greatest thing pastors are not doing is being with their people. That was the number one. He says they're busy, but he says they need to be busy with their people. Okay, so here's the ending of it. I believe that holy habits, when they tie into being a disciple and discipleship, holy habits require a commitment to discipline and toil. That is unavoidable. In other words, I wonder if today, there's no way you can carry out a holy habit or a New Year's resolution unless it's going to cause some turmoil, some pain in life. I think that needs to be understood. And for me, I never told you my New Year's resolution. It actually was my December resolution. You want to hear it? I decided that I would focus only on 1 hour of every day. And the first hour of every day, I said, I'm going to do 3 things in 20-minute increments. It's going to be stretching and exercise, right? Physical fitness, 20 minutes of devotion and meditation, and 20 minutes of planning my day. I was like, I'm going to do that. And I even told myself, I'm going to do that from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. Ask me how I'm doing. I've discovered that my New Year's resolution is more like Mountain and Pacific time than it is Central Standard Time. So I am a work in progress right now. But it's hard. It's discipline. It's carrying a cross at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I'm struggling with it. But I'm going to keep at it. Holy habits. Hebrews chapter 12. The writer of Hebrews talks about discipline. No discipline at that time is pleasant. It's painful. But it will produce a harvest of righteousness. All right. Holy habits also require training and equipping of people. I think this is the one that's gotten away from us. Us pastors, we're doers. We just like to do, and just get it done. And I think we need to step away from us, and we need to do a better job of preparing God's people for works of service. And so if we're going to do that, I think there needs to be a discipleship plan. Can you imagine if every family here at St. John's, there was a personalized discipleship plan for them, where they just have like maybe one discipleship goal at the beginning of the year, they commit to it, and then we support them in that. So, but if they're going to be able to do it, I think we got to give tools in order to help them. You can't just, there's got to be a system for that. Finally, holy habits require balance between self and serving. By self, I mean getting ourselves better, but then serving, discipleship. There needs to be a balance between the two. In order for that to happen, I think humility versus promotion, and we have to maintain the master and student, remembering who we follow. And then finally, and these are my last two slides, by the way. Am I still at 52 minutes? Growing personal discipleship strengthens discipline. You want discipline? Keep growing as a disciple, and discipline will happen. And then also, I think growing member discipleship, that's what makes membership meaningful. You know, whenever I experience like cranky, ornery members in my church, because some people think negativity is a spiritual gift, and what I found out was usually the people who are ornery and cranky, they just need something to do. And so being able, the more people who get involved with ministry, it's like if Aaron Rodgers played every football game with only 10 men on the field, that's stupid and it's ridiculous, right? And so why would a church carry out its ministry without having everybody on the field that they could? That's the point. It's Christianity is not a spectator sport. It's meant to be the involvement of all people. So that is where it ended. What was the last thing that Pastor Borland said I should share with you? What was it? What was it? Oh, putting contest. Oh, that. Putting contest at Center for Mission and Ministry on the second floor. I'm on one side. There's like it's wide open space all the way to the other side of the building. It is even longer than from that wall to that wall. And I'm 3 office doors down from President Mark Schrader. And every Friday at about 4 o'clock, I've got 5 golf balls and I've got 2 putters, and I pull them on out. And the goal is to get it from that side of our Synod's office building all the way to the other side of the Synod's office building. And so if you ever come on Friday, you can come and putt with me in front of it. And I have a pink golf ball included, just for you. So anyway, that's the putting. That's the fun stuff of it. Pastor Borland, you're dressed up. You look like you have to. Do we have to wrap up?
No, it's 7:18, and so you actually have time for questions or whatever you want to do, about 7 more minutes.
Oh, wonderful.
Then we'll give a little break, and you can walk out and get a service folder and come back in, or you can just walk out and go home. But we'll start prayer at the close of the day right at 7:30. So you got 7 minutes to do whatever you want.
I just figured that you called this the Veritas Lecture series, right? And so I took that word lecture like really literally. But just to be able to give you a snapshot through history of discipleship and being a disciple. So any questions that come to mind about personal discipleship here at St. John's? Any questions on that, or did we resolve everything? Please. How did what from on high? That's a good question. The thing about that master and student was simply what you're modeling, or the messages that you're modeling without maybe even words. And so obviously people had a high respect for him because of the genuineness of his faith. When they found his body, I mean, one of his disciples didn't see him for 3 days, and then finally climbed up and found him. They found him dead, but he was still in the form of prayer. You know, who doesn't respect, that kind of a story about someone who has such a high level of faith and how they lived it and how they carried it out? So,
Pastor Dobberstein, if you were king of Prussia and could do whatever you wanted, if you were pastor at St. John's McGuanago, a church of our size with a growing school family and growing church family, what's one area of improvement you would see for our discipleship?
I've thought about that a lot. I think I'm still learning, spending 23 parish ministry years in small congregations that were either 100 or 250 members. I spent 23 years in that gap. So I could do a lot of just relational, one-on-one with people. And so it makes it smaller you are, the more relational it becomes. You feel like a family. You are not a family. You are a bulging mini city of people who are here. And then it comes down to what's the system that you want for it. I think the larger you become, the harder you got to work at getting small. And that's discipleship. Discipleship, in its essence, is Jesus saying, come follow me. It's one and one. And so how do you do that? I think that's what St. John's needs, almost in a way. Its mentality of there's no one left behind. Every new member who comes here, there has to be some kind of a one-on-one connect. Not just with Christ, but someone else is also doing that. They're saying right now, the one thing that is keeping, they did a study of 18 to 25-year-olds who are Gen Z, and they said the one thing that they found out from Gen Zers, why did they stay in the faith, and why did they decide to go to church on a regular basis? It had to do with parental influence, but then after that, they said it was one member of the church who actually paid attention to me. So in other words, it's like an older member seeing someone else and saying, they're mine. Maybe it's because you just have a natural affinity for them, or they have the same likes, or maybe they're local to you, or they just have a great smile on their face, or you just love their little kids and you make googly eyes at them. But it was always someone who developed a relationship with that 18 to 25-year-old and then maintained it. They said that was huge. So that parental influence, but then some adult from church that said, you're worth my time. There are some, but not many. I think there are shepherding programs where they make it. I think that there are some churches that have the plan, but it's bulky, and then leadership changes and people move away and the whole thing falls off, it loses way again. So I think a lot of churches are struggling to say, what's the plan that works best for us? I think there's a lot of churches that actually think our pastors are so gifted, it's getting done. Or discipleship ministry is being carried out by those who were elected by our congregation to do it. And so I think I think that could be a series. Yeah, I think that there could be why ought St. John's, as big as she is, why ought she to think a one-on-one relationship? And then pound that for a year. Say, this is going to be the top priority, which you're going to have an extraordinary year, right? So you got this whole building project. You expect this building project, and then all of a sudden, there's going to be another flood of people. I think you can't do this building project without developing a serious discipleship plan to walk alongside of people. Yeah, there's a congregation out in, of all things, I think it's Billings, Montana, Pastor Jay Bigelow. They do a great job. Their worship stayed pushed back on COVID. And their kind of a member care program that's the entry point of service for new members. They want new members to be part of member care because it's easy to be able to do. And I've asked him in the 5 years that he's had it up and running, he said he's never lost a member to their member care group just grows and grows and grows because nobody wants to come off it. To me, that's cultural then. That people love to love on other people. So I say how many members now are here?
1,277.
I say your member care group, get 250 members.
Janet?
Together. Yeah, get an army. You've got an army of people, and I think a lot of them are very good at loving, and they may be quiet, they may not be talkers, but boy, can they love on other people. And some of them are like, maybe like me, which is, I want to shake your hand. I'm a woo. I want to go around and shake everybody's hand that's in the room. But some of you are people who see the one person nobody is talking to, and you'll go up to them. See, that's member care, walking alongside of them.
Let's thank